What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined always by my man in the corner, producer Nick Belsky. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, well, it is not a victory Monday. Unfortunately, a 27-13 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles at Lincoln Financial Field, the city of brotherly love that I'll tell you, Nick, not very brotherly, not very loving. The Steelers fall to 10-4 with a loss that definitely brought up some concerns. We're diving into Mike Tomlin, our reactions, the urgent need for George Pickens, and how the Pittsburgh Steelers should handle that on top of a massive injury that happened last night as TJ Watt goes down late in the fourth quarter. There are now questions. I was lucky enough to speak with TJ Watt after the game last night and have gotten a little bit more information as the last 12 or so hours has gone by. It's a rainy one here in Philadelphia, which only makes sense because the Pittsburgh Steelers lost. Like I said, this city, man, I grew up like 2 hours from it. Half my family lives here. It's always like cool to come to Philadelphia. I walked around in an all Steelers talk hat yesterday for most of the morning, and I have never been heckled more in my entire life, including Baltimore and Cleveland. It's a wild time, brotherly and loving. Would not use either word to describe the city of Philadelphia. Honking cars. That would probably be it. That would probably be the only thing I describe the city as, is honking cars. But still, how you feel, my friend? Hope you're holding in there.
Yeah, feeling all right. Obviously, is all right as you can feel after a Steelers loss, especially one to Philadelphia, where it's not a rivalry per se, but there is a city rivalry there. You just want to win no matter what it is. So it's unfortunate they weren't able to get the job done, but I think there were some positives to take out of yesterday, but obviously plenty more negatives, which is what happens whenever you lose a football game.
Yeah, I agree. I think in this one, there were more negatives than positives, or more negatives than usual, simply because of the way the game went down. But at the end of the day, if you make this one close, if Najee Harris doesn't fumble that football, I mean, you're looking at this going, this is a much closer game, and a game that the Pittsburgh Steelers can look at and probably find some positives to walk away from it. I think in this one, there aren't many positives to walk away from it. Alex Highsmith obviously is a monster. TJ Watt, if he didn't get hurt, I think last night solidified his Defensive Player of the Year campaign. But we have to see what's going on there and how much time he's going to miss in the near future, if he's going to miss any time at all. And I mean, I think there's potential he misses the rest of the regular season, but we'll dive into all of that. I'll start with this. 27-13, a game that the offense disappeared in, a game that the running game, I think we've ignored the woes for long enough. That's where I'll start. It is not Russell Wilson, who definitely did not play well last night. It is not George Pickens or Van Jefferson, or the fact that they refused to use Mike Williams, which we will dive into when we start talking George Pickens. It's the fact that 3 100-yard rushing games in a row blinded us from the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers running game is done. It's dead. It does not exist anymore. And at this point, they're 29th in the NFL in rushing. They have, I believe, less than a 30% success rate rushing the football. I don't know if it's the constant use of the pitch that does not work, has not worked in the NFL in years. I don't know why the Steelers are trying to get fancy with it, or if it's just the fact that the Steelers have a young offensive line that is not developed enough and a running back that simply is not built for this type of offense. I have no idea what's going on. What I do know is that all those times, all those questions about Najee Harris coming back to the Pittsburgh Steelers and me having to say he's not going to make it because he's either going to run himself out of town price tag wise, or the Steelers aren't going to want him back. I think at this point, it's almost a matter of both. The Steelers aren't going to be willing to pay a guy who isn't doing a ton in the last couple of weeks. And again, I put it on everybody across the board. Arthur Smith starts it with absolutely atrocious play calling when it comes to the running game. And then it goes just as deep as the offensive line is not doing their job. Broderick Jones isn't even the issue right now. It's everybody. Everybody across the board on that offensive line is not playing well. And Najee Harris just is not built for this offense. And I don't know what's going on, but I do think it's time to start testing the waters elsewhere and see if maybe more Jaylen Warren gets the job done. I'm not saying more Cordell Patterson, because in those moments late in the game where it should have been Jaylen Warren, it was Cordell Patterson, and that made absolutely no sense to me. And that's my biggest, if you want to talk biggest takeaway of this entire game, it is easily the fact that Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith, when things get tough and they are not fluid and this game is not going exactly as designed, they are two of the worst in the NFL right now, hands down. Mike Tomlin, 2 games, 2 recent losses, absolutely abysmal performances by him on his end. And I think he even admitted that last night when he said, "Oh, I had some things that got away from me." Yeah, things that got away from you, and you wasted 17 seconds of a shot clock or of a play clock with under 2 minutes left, which you definitely could have used that 17 seconds. Instead, you wasted a timeout and 17 seconds. Doesn't make any sense. And Arthur Smith saying Van Jefferson isn't getting the job done. Scotty Miller's not getting the job done. Maybe we just put Mike Williams in. Nah, that doesn't seem like the answer here. Instead, we'll just continue to do the same things over and over and over again. We'll continue to call pitch plays. We'll put Cordell Patterson in big, crucial moments when we desperately need this drive to work. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know what's going on with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I still have a pretty positive stance on them, but there were some glaring issues yesterday that were presented in areas that everybody will point out. Russell Wilson, everybody will talk. I mean, I was listening to ESPN earlier this morning, and Rex Ryan's going on his absolutely crazy rant saying, "Start Justin Fields." No, that's not the answer here. The answer is to just coach better football and figure out the rest as you go. My biggest takeaways in this one, man, the running game is gone. There is no running game in Pittsburgh right now. We have been blinded by 3 100-yard games that happened 7 weeks ago. And the coaching just isn't there right now, and it's becoming an issue.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, with coaching, it was alarming last night to hear Mike Tomlin say, "I don't think the slow starts really hurt us." Because
he says that all the time.
But at the end of the day, when you're playing a good team like this, the slow start is everything, because they get off to a slow start. That's what the first 3 drives. That's more than they had in the entire second half, because you get off to a slow start. You give Philadelphia the advantage, even when they're trying to make it even with the 2 fumbles, and you can't take advantage of those because of your slow start. And all of a sudden you get to be a little bit better leading into halftime. And then you get 2 drives in the second half in which you were moving the football, but it was a Najee fumble and it was a poor coaching decision by Mike Tomlin to say, we're going to punt it with 10 minutes left, down 2 scores. They never got the ball back, because good teams will take that and they will absolutely drain the clock. I think there was a full team loss yesterday, but there were some things that stand out more than others, the coaching being one of it, and 2, the running game being a massive focal point. We talked about, the big boys being the headliners for this one. 4 different line groupings in that game yesterday. 3 of them showed up to play. 1 of them didn't, and that was the Steelers' offensive line. And you can't win in a matchup like that if your offensive line isn't clicking and your running game isn't clicking. So I'm not going to say that they were outclassed, but I will say, in a game like that, it shows you that, hey, you have to show up from the jump. Philly did. That's why they drove the ball down the field early. That's why they got a 17-3 lead to begin with. And they were able to coast after that, even though they struggled at points, even though the Steelers defense outplayed them at points, even though the offense started to move at points. They were already in control of the game, and they were able to kind of slip up and falter a little bit and then catch their footing and put this one away in the second half.
That's my thing, is it's just excusing and ignoring every single time when it comes to Mike Tomlin, when it comes to these issues, and then nothing gets changed. And I'd be very okay if he just pretty much told us to screw off and he was like, "Hey man, I'm not going to answer this question. Like, I'm going to give you kind of a jerkish answer." And that'd be okay if there were adjustments and changes and these things got fixed, but that almost never happens. You watch him say constantly the slow starts do not impact a game. And then we talk about it 3 weeks later about how the slow starts impact the game, and players constantly talk in the locker room about how slow starts impact the game. So he's clearly saying these things to the players. He's just ignoring it to us. But there are no adjustments. There are no fixes. And I think that's the glooming issue here is why? Like, why are you saying these things? Why are the players highlighting these things? Mike Tomlin has weekly meetings, okay? He has meetings with his offensive leader group and his defensive leader group every single Wednesday. That is how he starts the practice week. And they come in and they talk about adjustments and changes that needs to happen, concerns from within the locker room, how players feel the team can get better. And I have a hard time imagining that this has never been brought up. And there's just never been any adjustments. I also have a hard time imagining that a guy as vocal as Najee Harris is sitting there saying, yeah, just keep running pitches. Pitches work all the time with me. They're actually just astronomical when it comes to my yards per carry. Thank you for continuing to run them. No, I doubt that. I highly doubt that. It's just the lack of adjustments. And then the timeout call at the end of the first half was just classic Mike Tomlin, man. Classic Mike Tomlin. You want to put this loss on a lot of things, you probably can. Mike Tomlin, it has to be the top of that list. He has to be the top of that list. And I still think Mike Tomlin's Hall of Fame, Coach of the Year worthy coach. But this is the second game this season. And, you know, you could talk Dallas. There were moments in Dallas, but Cleveland and Philadelphia were the big ones that stood out, where Mike Tomlin got outcoached by a mile. And it was clear as day that he hurt his team in that process. And I have a hard time believing any adjustments are going to happen. On the other side of that, before we get into TJ Watt here, Russell Wilson, man. I mean, what happens when George Pickens leaves? And does George Pickens need to come back right now? Like, can the Pittsburgh Steelers afford to be without George Pickens for the rest of this regular season? Or are they about to look at a low seed wild card team or wild card game because they're going to lose out the rest of the year without their top wide receiver? The Cleveland Browns were a good test, but they weren't a great test. They weren't a B+ or higher test. They were a B- or lower test. And you saw an A test in how the Steelers flunked it. I mean, is it time for George Pickens to say, you got to come back? Because I get it. There's really no difference between the 2 and the 3 seed. And at this point, you're not going to win either of them anyways. But you need to win the North. You need to win the North. You can't go to Buffalo. You can't go to Houston. You can't go to, Baltimore. You don't want to go to any of those. You want a game at Acrisure Stadium. Is it time for George Pickens to make his return and for the Steelers to do everything in their power to make sure that he is back?
No, I think that you still need to be very careful with this, because understand it is very important that you need to get an AFC North, or division victory. You need to host a playoff game. I understand that it's important, but it's not impossible to win in the playoffs as a road team. What's impossible for this team is to win in the playoffs without George Pickens. And I understand that it is vastly important to play these games at home. It makes your road so much easier. But if there's no George Pickens, there's no Super Bowl chances. So I think that you need to play it a little bit safe still. I know that yesterday looked ugly, but what I'll say is it was more so on the offensive line and the fact that they continued to run a play action whenever their run game was non-existent, which means Philadelphia players had no faith in the Steelers running game. They were shooting straight at Russell Wilson. He didn't have time half the time. And when he did have time, it was short throws to the line of scrimmage where they were already on the ball. So I'm not taking too much of an overreaction on yesterday's game. I think that it'd be nice to get George Pickens back, but if he is not ready, you don't push him back, even if it means potentially losing next week to Baltimore, because if you lose him for a much longer period of time, you're not winning in the playoffs. I understand it's harder to win from a lower seed, but it's possible. It's impossible for this team to win without George Pickens in the postseason.
I think it might be. I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you, but I do think the Steelers are stuck between a rock and a hard place right now, because I think it is. I think if the Steelers were to go to Buffalo right now, they would have no shot, even with George Pickens. They just don't have right now. They don't have the coaching or the firepower, and they're beat up on injuries, and they're 5-0, or I guess now 5-1 against winning teams this season. But it's all about momentum. They got to find that momentum. They had the momentum on the ground game that helped the play action, that helped Russell Wilson, that helped everybody included. That's gone. Now you have no momentum. And you see what's happening to this offense as the momentum fails, that there is just no spark. You can't pick it up. You can't get on a roll. I think if George is 90% or higher, I'm playing him this week against Baltimore. And then I'm sitting him the rest of the season. He doesn't have to go back on the field against Kansas City or against anybody else. I look at it and simply say, if you can beat Baltimore and claim the AFC North, your season's over. Who cares? Just go to the playoffs. But it is a massive advantage. I mean, we could look at the numbers. It is a massive advantage for the Pittsburgh Steelers to play at home in the playoffs instead of having to go somewhere and take a shot about how bad this season could get real fast. And that's my thing is right now, Baltimore is not a team you lose to in my head. I still think that the Steelers beat the Ravens. I still think the Steelers have a shot against Kansas City, especially with Patrick Mahomes going down. But I think it's as simple in my head as don't take the risk if you don't have to take the risk. And I think there are two risks. The risk of George Pickens getting hurt and you not having him for the playoffs, and the risk of, not winning the AFC North and getting a wild card spot, which I think is equally as bad because you are really taking a massive risk. Send him to Baltimore if he's 90% or above, win that game, and shut him down for the rest of the season. Shut down TJ for the rest of the season, which is what we'll talk about next. But if you got George, at least you got a fighting shot because Russ could win you games. I don't know if Russ, no George Pickens, no TJ Watt, and a bad Mike Tomlin can win you games the rest of the season. I just think that might be too much to overcome. When it comes to TJ, I think we both agree with this one. Maybe not, but TJ's not touching the field for the rest of the season. And when it comes to his injury, this is what I've been told over the last 12 hours. TJ suffered a low ankle sprain. X-rays were negative. He confirmed that last night. But it's still a situation where typically you miss 3 to 4 weeks. This is what Alex Highsmith was dealing with. It looked way more gruesome on Alex Highsmith than it did TJ Watt. And I think it's hilarious how all the online doctors, I don't know if you saw everybody on Twitter, but I laugh at those people every time. We're like, oh, it's a Jones fracture. It's over. Season's done. I'm like, yeah, you got that one from him walking off the field. That's where you got that from. Low ankle sprain is what the doctors in Pittsburgh confirmed. He's looking at a couple of weeks without him before he's 100%. I don't think he comes back before the playoffs. I think he's ready for the first round of the playoffs. It doesn't make a difference. Like TJ Watt gets hurt right now. He's not playing anyways. That's the move. I have a hard time thinking you would disagree with me on that one, right? And then at the same time to that, has his defensive player of the year chances ended because of yesterday.
If he doesn't play the last 3 weeks of the season, there's a chance that somebody else steps up in his absence and kind of takes over that role. I do think that he has a little bit of grace here. I think he's still the favorite when it comes to defensive player of the year. Somebody just needs to step up because even yesterday in the game that could potentially be his last game of the regular season, he had 2 sacks and a forced fumble and definitely could have had another one if Jalen Hurts didn't have just ironclad grip on that one sack that TJ had late in the first half. But no, I agree with you. It's second verse, same as the first. What did I say about George Pickens? You can win in the regular season. You can, do whatever you want, but you can't win in the playoffs without TJ Watt. There is no Super Bowl if there's no TJ Watt. So I think even more so than with George Pickens, you need to play very, very cautious with TJ Watt. And it's unfortunate, but I also think that, as you mentioned, I think last week, the floor or the drop off is not as dramatic. I understand that TJ is a higher quality in his position than George is, but Alex being the number 2, Nick Herbig being the number 3 is a much better fallback than Mike Williams, who's never used, being the number 2, Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin being the number 3. So I think that, especially considering that big, massive game next week is against Baltimore, is in the division, which automatically makes it a lot closer of a contest, I think that you certainly rest TJ Watt and make sure that he is 100%. You said that George Pickens at 90%. I'm kind of like back and forth if he's up to 90. I don't know if he's going to be at 90. That's why I would say sit him. But if TJ Watt is anything less than 97%, then you do not put him out there on the field, because without him being on the field in the playoffs, there's no chance the Steelers do it, no matter what seed they end up with.
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, the Steelers are in good graces enough to say, well, we lost yesterday, and it stunk, and it stings a little bit, and it definitely hurt everybody's perspective on that, and we'll get there in a second. But we did clinch a playoff spot. If you beat Baltimore, which that's the big one, is you don't have to wait for Baltimore. This isn't we have to see what we could do in the next 3 weeks. You beat Baltimore, I mean, it's over. You know what I mean? You know you got the 3 seed. You're feeling pretty confident. You got to feel good against Cincinnati. If you could somehow pull off a win against Kansas City, which if Patrick Mahomes does not play, and I think it's nuts if he plays against Pittsburgh, especially if the Steelers or if Kansas City wins next week. If Kansas City wins next week, I believe they claim the 1st seed. No, because Buffalo
beat them.
Buffalo beat them and Detroit last night. So they have to win 2. I still think that you take it down to the wire. I still think if I'm Kansas City, that's when if we're talking about this with TJ Watt and George Pickens, and I get it, Patrick Mahomes, we've all seen him fighting on the sidelines with Andy Reid, but I just have a hard time believing that in 9 days he's going to play the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's got the same injury as TJ Watt. Actually, he's got a worse one. He's got a high ankle sprain. That's not a place where you come back in 9 days. You come back in multiple weeks, not 9 days. I could see the Steelers saying, well, we beat Baltimore. We claim the AFC North. We beat Kansas City. All right, we're done. You know, Cincinnati, nobody's playing in Cincinnati. Justin Fields is playing. Kyle Allen's probably getting some snaps in Cincinnati. That's where the Steelers would be. I agree. I don't think TJ touches the field for the rest of the season. I hope he still wins Defensive Player of the Year. I think last night was a shame, and I don't know, man. Like it's I don't want to say this out loud, but like I do at the same time. I was sitting in that press box, and every time he got to the quarterback, I was just like, I don't know why, but I was sitting there going, "Get up, make sure you get up, get up." And it was just weird. It was just it felt like a dominant game where the Steelers got punched, and TJ would have been the biggest punch they could take. Again, I don't know. I didn't feel good. I didn't say it out loud all night long because I was not jinxing anything. But once it happened, I went, damn, that was tough. All right, let's finish it off with this one. Are the Steelers still Super Bowl contenders in your eyes? That's their first loss to a winning team this season. Mm-hmm. Very important to point out here. They are 2-2 in the last 4 games. They have 2 pretty brutal losses in those last 4 games. They are now 10-4 on the season. They take on the Baltimore Ravens, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Cincinnati Bengals to finish off this regular season, and then they head into the postseason. I mean, Philadelphia is 10 games in a row. You have to bring that into account. They made the Baltimore Ravens not look good 2 weeks ago. You have to bring that into account. But the Steelers have issues, man. And they are definitely apparent, and they are possibly growing along with some injury concerns. Are the Steelers still a Super Bowl contender in your eyes?
I think that there is a little bit of a gap between them and the top, but I wouldn't rule them out as a Super Bowl contender. I think that they still have the capabilities, if they get hot and if they get healthy, to put the team together to be able to go on that run, because I think that their style of play travels well. First and foremost, if they can get their run game going the way that it has been in the past and it has been at some points this season, that travels, and their defense travels. And I think that last night you were down a couple of key pieces. Philadelphia played the best that they could possibly play at a home environment, and you made a couple of key errors, because let's not forget, they played poorly without George Pickens, without Deshaun Elliott, which is a much bigger absence than I think a lot of people are giving credit for, without Larry Ogunjobi. They made key errors, and yet when Najee Harris fumbled that ball, they still, if he wouldn't have done that, they could have gone in the end zone and tied the game late in the third quarter and had a lot of momentum, because they had been carrying the momentum through the second quarter and into the early portion of the third. So I think that shows you that even when they're playing the hottest team in the NFL and they're still making mistakes, they can be in it. I think they have the talent to do it. They just need to get out of their own way. That's the biggest thing. What were we talking about at the early portion of this? The biggest issues yesterday, mental errors. Najee wasn't forced to fumble that ball. He just fumbled it and then punted it 6 yards forward. Mike Tomlin wasn't forced to not call that timeout or punt the ball in the fourth quarter. It was a mental error. So if they're healthy, I think they have the talent to do it. They just need to get out of their own way, and then they'll have a chance. I'm not saying they're a favorite if they do that, but they'll have a chance.
I'm not saying the Steelers are done. I'm not saying the Steelers are no longer contenders. What I'm saying is that teams make mistakes, multiple mistakes, and still win games. The Pittsburgh Steelers are not a team that does that well. The Steelers are a team that you have to either play nearly perfect for an outcome, or that outcome is not going to be in your favor. That's where the Pittsburgh Steelers are kind of quickly going to, because you're finding yourself in a situation where you're in Cleveland and you're making coaching mistakes and you can't overcome those coaching mistakes. You're in Philadelphia and you're making coaching mistakes and on-field mistakes and personnel mistakes, and you can't overcome those mistakes. And to be even more honest, I don't know if maybe you have a different answer here, but Mike Tomlin has given me little reason over the last few years to believe that he is capable of not making mistakes, because he does. Mike Tomlin's a phenomenal coach. But Mike Tomlin is one of the most stubborn coaches in the NFL, and his adjustment time is absolutely atrocious. That's why the Steelers did not play Mike Williams all night long against Philadelphia. That's why Mike Tomlin took 17 seconds to call a timeout before realizing, oh, shit, I just wasted pretty much a full play and a timeout on this one after the 2-minute drill. That's why, I mean, to be honest, that's why the Steelers are still doing things like playing Cordero Patterson as much as they are. That's why Mike Tomlin week after week after week after week talks about how slow starts are not hurting his team when they clearly are. That's where I get nervous. Is I agree with you. I think the Steelers have the talent. I think the Steelers have the defense. I think the defense looked damn good yesterday. Even giving up 27 points, they were without Deshaun Elliott, who solves a lot of those. He definitely does, because there were 2 or 3 moments where Jalen Hurts or Saquon Barkley or something runs through a DeMonte KZ or a Minka Fitzpatrick tackle, and you're going, Deshaun's making that tackle. And there's no questions asked. Deshaun's making that tackle. I think with George there, the offense is way better, and you have a passing game that's dangerous. I agree with that. I just am not very confident that the Steelers could get out of their own way, because they've shown little that they can. And that's what it's going to come down to, is you're no longer playing the Browns. You're no longer playing the Bengals. You're no longer playing, I mean, you might play the Ravens, but chances are you're going to play teams that can overcome the mistakes they make, and the Steelers are going to have to overcome the mistakes that the Steelers make, and they struggle to do so. And that's where I still think, again, I don't disagree with you. I still think the Steelers are contenders. If you want to lay out their biggest worry, it is not the Steelers are not good. It is not Russell Wilson is fallen off. It's not any of that. It is very simply, I don't know how much faith I have in the coaching staff to allow this team to overcome their woes. And that's, I mean, you're not going to beat Andy Reid doing that. You're just not. At the end of the day, you are not. You couldn't even beat Nick Sirianni, who's out here fighting his tackle after slapping Connor Hayward around. I mean, you if you can't do that, you're in trouble. So that's my worry is can you overcome the coaches? And I just, as crazy as that sounds, because the Steelers coaching staff's phenomenal, I just don't know if they can. Where we currently stand, I don't know if they can.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's very aggravating, because you look at Mike Tomlin, and I said this last night, and it kind of became clear. I don't know why I never put this to myself before, but he is one of the best, if not one of the greatest of all time in preparation and motivation. But once that game starts, it drops off so drastically. And I'm not sure how that's possible, how you can be one of the best in preparation and motivation, but once the lights get bright, you become one of the worst of 32. And that's not an exaggeration, because these are rookie head coach mistakes that he's been making. And he's what, 15, 16, 17 years into this thing. But
19.
it doesn't 19. It doesn't mean that he's a horrible coach. It just means that his flaw is something that right now is hurting the Steelers, and his flaw is in-game coaching and clock management. It's always been that, but it doesn't mean he's a bad coach, because the other things are very important. But whenever it's biting you the way that it's been biting the Steelers, that's when you look and you say, man, if only he was slightly better in game.
Yes.
And that's why everybody says he gets out coached, is because on Sundays he does. From Monday to Saturday, I'm sure he's the greatest in the league, but on Sundays he's not. And that's when everybody notices it.
We'll see what happens. At this point where we currently stand, I mean, the Steelers are still 10-4, and you have to look at it and say they're probably still going to win the North. And that's, I mean, this was the season where Mike Tomlin was supposed to win 7 games. So they've already pulled off a lot. And tomorrow is big, because that's where it starts. You kind of judge, and I think everybody does the same thing, is, at least for me, I judge my reaction off of those on the ESPNs, those on the Fox Sports, those on the radio, those who the overreactions are crazy and abundant and just over the top. And if my reaction today matches those tomorrow, I know I'm way overboard. If my reaction is dim compared to those tomorrow, I'm like, okay, Steelers might be in a little bit of trouble right now. So that's how I judge. I gave it 48 hours. In that 48 hours, how many times does Rex Ryan say to play Justin Fields? You know, if that number is significantly higher than my craziest overreaction, you know, we're in a good spot. If that number is small and I'm going, okay, I almost sound like Rex Ryan, I'll come back tomorrow and have a little bit something different to say about the Pittsburgh Steelers. But for right now, the Steelers are 10-4. They still got a shot at the AFC North, but yesterday was it was a tough one to watch, start to finish. With that said, it's time to dive into all your questions. We've talked about everything on our agenda. It's time to talk about yours. If you got them, toss them in the chat. We'll answer all of them before we head out of here. Nick, I'm going to toss it to you. What do we got?
Yeah, let's kick it off with Noah Thomas, who says, please talk about what it takes for the Steelers to win the North. That Thursday night football loss to the Browns is so big.
It actually, I mean, it stung. It was a brutal loss. It made everybody freak out for 11 days. It was I mean, for me and you, Nick, it was a brutal 11 days, dude. Damage control was on full blast at All Steelers Talk podcast here. That being said, it didn't do much hurt or much harm for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the AFC North race. All they have to do is beat the Ravens in Baltimore at M&T Bank Stadium on Saturday, a game that they are 6.5-point underdogs to start the week for, which you want to talk about overreaction. That's an overreaction. 6.5-point dogs in that one, but they are historically very good at M&T Bank Stadium. They are historically very good against Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. And everybody seems to say it's just like last week, you know, the Pittsburgh Steelers beat the Cleveland Browns without George Pickens. And everybody's like, this is the greatest team of all time. Lamar Jackson throws 5 touchdowns against the worst team in the NFL. And everybody goes, oh man, it's over, dude. The Ravens are the greatest team of all time. Lamar Jackson, give them the MVP. You know, these are both good teams, and I think it'll be a hard-fought battle, but I think the Steelers might still be deserving of a little bit of a bump here instead of a 6.5-point dog.
Yeah, the fortunate thing for the Steelers is if they lose this one, they end up in a tie with the Baltimore Ravens, and they would have the same division record. So then all you'd have to do is make sure that you win out and you still claim the division, because they have a better in-conference record, which would be the next tiebreaker. So if you lose to Baltimore, it's not over. It's just the easiest path, and the path of least resistance is beat Baltimore, and it's over.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to just go beat the Ravens instead of taking on the Chiefs and then
and the
Cincinnati. Yeah.
Let's go over to Noah Thomas again, who says JPJ has proven not to be an island man cover. The Steelers are not good in zone. How do they fix the secondary coverage schemes for the remainder of this season and the playoffs?
So again, the Joey Porter Jr. not being a man on an island, and then the Steelers not being good in zone is just a giant contradiction. And I think everybody sees it and kind of says the same thing. And I'm not saying like it's the wrong thing to say. I'm just saying it doesn't really equal out, because when the Steelers play man, Joey Porter's pretty good. And you saw it a couple of times last night. When the Steelers drop into this zone, this cover 3 zone, they're terrible across the board. They're terrible, but that does not go to that. They don't have guys that play zone defense. That is just not what they have. They went out and they got Patrick Queen, who's a fast, speedy inside linebacker who can compete in coverage with guys. They drafted Peyton Wilson, who can do the same thing. They went out and got Deshaun Elliott, who's a thumper. They have Minkah Fitzpatrick, who plays center field. And they have Dante Jackson and Joey Porter Jr., who are both man corners, and they play zone defense. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That's the problem. I don't think it has anything to do with Joey. I think when you drop into zone coverage, Joey's not the greatest. He's not supposed to be. He's a man-to-man physical corner, and that's what the Steelers should be playing almost exclusively. You should almost always be in man. The Steelers love their zone defense, dude. They love their zone defense. Mike Tomlin, it's like Jim Boeheim and the zone defense in Syracuse. That's what it is. It's Mike Tomlin says, this is what we do here, and we are going to do it well, even when we don't do it well. And that's where we're at. It's a Mike Tomlin TA thing. It doesn't make any sense that the Pittsburgh Steelers still play zone defense, especially as much as they do. I think Joey's got his issues this season, obviously, but I do think that Joey's a man-to-man corner and plays much better if you put him in man-to-man.
Let's jump over to Peter, who says, are you concerned about Russell Wilson's very inconsistent play?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think when Russ is hot, he is really good. I also think that he's getting no help. Like, again, I hate that this is a big Mike Tomlin got out coached, and that's where the conversation has to go constantly. This is a big Arthur Smith got out coached, and that's where this conversation has to go constantly. Because why is Van Jefferson running the deep route in triple coverage instead of Mike Williams? Why is the running game non-existent? And to try to get it open, you throw one quick out pass that worked really well, actually, until Darnell Washington threw Darius Slay into the wall. And for some reason, the refs didn't see any thrown punches. Everybody else saw every thrown punch. The refs and New York clearly did not. If that doesn't work, I mean, if that doesn't happen, that's a great play. And they ran it one other time, and I believe it was to Cordero Patterson after that. And why? Why is that your solution to fixing the running game? And then you don't do it again. You just continue to pitch the football. So what happens if he has a running game? I think Russell Wilson plays really, really well when he has a running game. I don't think anybody in the NFL plays well when you don't have a running game. And you know, Russ didn't have a good game yesterday. The Russ magic is certainly dying off. I agree with that. But I do think he's still really good when everything else is clicking around him. And that's kind of all you're looking for with this quarterback setup is Justin's going to be the same way. He's going to be good when everything's good around him. And right now, nothing's good around them. So you're kind of just faced with very average offensive play.
You mentioned Cordero Patterson in that answer. Let's go to Donald, who wants to know, why is Cordero Patterson even seeing the field?
Your guess is as good as mine, my friend. Your guess is as good as... Go ahead.
He waved the white flag. Cordero Patterson went in. Mike Tomlin did.
Yeah.
Cordero Patterson, that drive that everybody is freaking out over him being in, was the last offensive drive of the game right after Najee Harris's fumble. It's the same drive that on a 4th and 7 in Philly territory, Mike Tomlin decided to punt. He had waved the white flag on the game. He said, we're down 2 scores on the road in Philadelphia, and we have a division game in 6 days. Cordero, it's your time. Go. Yeah. Because I don't want Jalen getting hurt. I don't want Najee getting hurt. So Cordero Patterson's going to run this drive. And if we score a touchdown, then that's great. We'll put everybody back out there if the game's back on the line. But down by 14, he put Cordero out there and then further cemented that he waved the white flag by punting it on 4th and 7.
I don't disagree. I think it's mind-blowing that he sees the field offensively ever at all. But again, it is an out circumstance. It is waving the white flag. In others, it's why. It's just a big why. It doesn't make any sense. It's the everything else. Every other player that you see on the field that you go, why are they out there over this person? It's because the Pittsburgh Steelers made a commitment to them 8 months ago, and now they just can't seem to change that commitment.
Let's go over to Loswald, who says, why is James Pierre getting more reps than Corey Trice? Is Trice still not all the way back from injury?
I would imagine Corey Trice is pretty much there, but he hasn't played since week 3. So that's a lot of you have to kind of get yourself back up to football speed. That's a lot more difficult than people make it seem, especially for a guy who didn't play last season. Like, he's got 2.5 games of NFL experience. It's much more difficult for him to be back on this field than probably anybody else who is or who would experience that same situation. I think that's what's going on here. I expect Corey to be back next week if Dante Jackson is not able to play, which I have a hard time believing he's going to be. And I expect Corey to start. That being said, I understand why the Steelers are going with James Pierre and making Corey Trice inactive right now. You got to get up to football speed. You got to get back into this. And you have almost no experience, which makes it very difficult. Plus, James Pierre is one hell of a special teamer. And I understand a lot of people don't take that into account. The Steelers special teams have won them games, so that's why they take it into account. But I expect Corey Trice to play against Baltimore.
Let's go over to Marlon Lewis, who says, if Mike Williams isn't getting played and he was having issues in New York, is this more that he's not as good as we hoped than he's not getting the opportunities?
I do think that there's part of it being he does not understand the offense yet. It does not have anything to do with him not being good. It's just the understanding the offense. But again, just like I just said, this comes down to the Pittsburgh Steelers stamping Van Jefferson as their number 2 in, when did they sign him? May. Mm-hmm. And saying he is our number 2 and will remain our number 2 through January, no matter what. And that's what's going on here. I think it's 50% Mike Williams is not accumulated to the offense and is struggling to understand and learn the offense and get a grip of the offense. And 50% that the Pittsburgh Steelers do not make personnel changes like this. And they look at this as a big drastic change that they don't have to make, even though they desperately do.
Let's go over to Vic, who says, Noah, is Arthur Smith just Matt Canada 2.0?
No, he is not. I think that's the thing, is if we could go back and just watch one game of Matt Canada's offense for the Pittsburgh Steelers, everybody would understand, oh, okay, this is actually a billion times better than what it was. I mean, if you just want an example, I'm pretty sure the Eagles, what did the Eagles win the last time they played the Steelers? Like 45-7, something like that. Like, yeah. So, definitely not as good, but are definitely not good, but definitely better. And I no, he's not Matt Canada 2.0.
Let's go over to Marlon Lewis, who I believe is talking about Najee Harris here. Says, why are we going to re-sign an old guy who needs strong defense and a run game to be average?
I think we're talking about Russ.
Or Russell Wilson.
Yeah. I think unless Russ, look at again, what I think and what the Steelers do are typically two different things. If I had to guess what the Steelers are going to do, they already know Russell Wilson's going to be the quarterback of the future. If I had to do it myself, I would look at it and say Russ has to prove himself over these last 3 games. There are no decisions to be made until the end of January, February. And right now, Russ isn't a guy that I'm taking a huge chance on. I'd feel more comfortable taking a chance on Justin Fields and saying, what can he do at 26 years old? But I agree with you. I think a more alarming part of this is, why isn't your offense set up to not be average? And why is your running game set up not to be average. And how do you fix that? That is, I think, in my opinion, the bigger concern here, because if if Russ is good, if everything around Russ is good, Russ is really good. And if that's the case, why not just make everything else really good? Why haven't the Steelers done that? It's because, a little bit because of their ignorance, I would say.
Let's go over to David, who says, would you then play it safe and keep Deshaun Elliott and Larry O off the field along with TJ and George? Also, notice Montravius was on special teams. Why is he not playing the middle of the D line?
He did play a lot of the D line.
Yesterday, he did.
Yeah. A lot of defensive tackles play special teams as well. Cam Hayward plays every special team. So that's why he was out there. But I don't know if I would play it safe with Deshaun and Larry O. I would want to know how close they are. I don't think Larry O is very close. I don't imagine him playing until the playoffs. Deshaun is a guy that if he's good, if you could get him out there against Baltimore and you could win that game, I'm okay with shutting him down the rest of the season. Baltimore is so important. You cannot throw away this season and say, well, we made the playoffs, but we didn't win the AFC North, even though we had a clear advantage in the AFC North. And Deshaun's going to play a big role into that. So I would kind of play that one by ear and see how close he is. And if there is no long-term risk associated with his injury at that point, I would play him. If there was any, I agree with you. I think I'd keep him off the field.
Let's go over to Mark, who says, what do you think our chances are possibly without Pickens in the playoffs?
Oh, if Pickens doesn't play in the playoffs, the Steelers are don't expect the Pittsburgh Steelers playoff win. That's where I stand. Doesn't matter who you play. I don't think unless you end up against Denver, unless you end up against, I don't know who else would be the wild card. Who would be the last wild card? The Chargers. They're not beating the Chargers. It'd be the Chargers, Baltimore, Denver would be the 3 wild card spots. Mm-hmm. And unless you end up against Denver, which you wouldn't, you'd end up against either Baltimore or LA. I don't think you're beating those guys without George Pickens. I just don't.
What are your thoughts if, again, hoping this is not the case, hoping the Steelers take care of business next week in Baltimore, but if they end up with the 5 seed and go to the Houston Texans, do you think they have a chance without George? Nope.
No, I don't. I think traveling is way more difficult than people are kind of making it out to seem, especially in the postseason. Like you have to, traveling is not easy as it is. And to go to a venue with a quarterback that, isn't having the best season, but CJ Stroud's still a good quarterback and they got a lot of talent going on there. I don't know. I don't think I'd put I'd put that above LA and Baltimore. I'd say that, but I don't think I'd go any harder than that. And would you end up against, because aren't the Chargers a 4-win team, a 4-loss team right now?
The Chargers are a 6-loss team right now.
Oh, they are on a little bit of a skid here. Huh. They were a 4-loss team 2 weeks ago. I would put Houston above chances of beating Houston above LA and Baltimore without George. I still wouldn't feel good about it though.
Let's go over to Chris, who says, who is a good corner they could draft to match JPJ's skill set?
ESPN had them drafting Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky, and I like that. He's a big physical dude as well. He's like 6'2", real lengthy, really good with the ball. He had like 5 interceptions a year ago, something like that. I like that a lot. That's the problem, is you're going to be end of the first round, and the cornerback class this year is not the greatest. There's obviously Travis Hunter and Will Johnson, but it's kind of dead after that. There's not really like the standout, this is the guy. Hairston, I like. I think you might have a shot in free agency to land somebody too, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did something like that.
Let's go over to Vibin with the Dogs, who's making the return today. Says, isn't Justin Fields hurt?
Yeah, he did suffer an abdominal injury yesterday. Not sure his status moving forward. We'll see what happens. That was a huge loss for the Steelers. I thought they could have used him a lot yesterday, and I was looking forward to seeing them using him a lot yesterday. But I would imagine it keeps him out a week on a short week, possibly Kansas City as well. It's not the greatest situation. The Steelers will do what they do, every time a quarterback's hurt, and they will make him inactive without ruling him out and allow him to be the emergency quarterback. But I don't expect Justin Fields to play the next 2 weeks.
Let's go over to Jake, who wants another injury update. Anything on Dante Jackson?
No news, but this is like 4 weeks, 5 weeks this season that Dante Jackson's it's been all season, but this is like the 4th or 5th time where Dante Jackson specifically suffered a back injury. And this one looked bad. Like he went down holding his back. He laid there. He walked off the field holding his back. It did not look good. Dante, I don't imagine plays this week or maybe next week. It's not looking great. We'll see if Corey Trice and James Pierre can cover the load. I also expect Cam Sutton to be a little bit in the mix on the outside as well without Dante Jackson.
Let's finish it off with Henry, who says, if the season ended today, who would the Pittsburgh Steelers play? And it would be that revenge matchup for Russell Wilson. Steelers would be hosting the Broncos if the season ended today.
Wait, really? They're above LA right now?
They jumped above LA because the Broncos are 9-5 and the Chargers are 8-6.
Holy smokes. Wow. Shout out to Denver, man. I think that's their best matchup. Justin Herbert's hurt, which makes me nervous, but Jim Harbaugh is a football coach, man. Like, he's not a guy I want to play. Sean Payton doesn't really intimidate me right now. That's a potentially big one right there. I would like Denver's matchup. I'd like Russell Wilson in that matchup. I like the Steelers defense against Bo Nix a lot. I would say that's a good place to be. That's if we're going to rank them, the Broncos, the Chargers, the Broncos, Houston, the Chargers, and which even with Justin Herbert's injury, maybe I'd take that back. Maybe I go back on my own words here and go Denver, LA, Houston, Baltimore would be my picks on where you're going here. I mean, none of them are easy, but a rookie quarterback's got to be your easiest, and a beat up quarterback's got to be your second easiest, right?
Yeah, rookie quarterback on the road in his first playoff game. I think that would 100% be the draw that you would like to take. I wouldn't go as far to call it easy, just simply because there's been a lot of good Bo Nix, but also like he threw 3 picks yesterday. It just so happened to be against a Colts team that tried a reverse pass and instead threw a 60-yard pick 6. So I think that the Denver Broncos are probably the best matchup for the Steelers if you had to cherry pick one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's every year, unless it's CJ Stroud, obviously, but that's every year. There's a rookie quarterback. I'm playing the rookie quarterback, but we'll see what happens. I think the biggest part here is get the fans to Acrisure Stadium, because I get it that like people want to talk talent and matchup and whatever. At the end of the day, forcing a team to go on a silent count, giving them that energy, getting TJ Watt and everybody hyped up, like it makes such a difference in these crucial moments. And I think that's super important as you enter the postseason. So
yeah, not only forcing the other team to go on a silent count, but allowing your young offensive line to not have to deal with that in their first playoff game. Massive.
Exactly. So we'll see what happens.
We do have one more here really quickly. Lifted One says, does Tomlin speak today or tomorrow?
Tomlin speaks today. His press conference is at noon. Everything is bumped up a day because they play on Saturday. So the Steelers, Tomlin will talk today, which I will clearly not be at. I will be covering from my car on the turnpike back to Pittsburgh. So Tomlin will talk today. They'll practice tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday. Injury report will come out Thursday afternoon. Friday's an off day. That's their walkthrough. And then Saturday they will travel to, or I guess they'll travel. No, they'll probably travel Friday to Baltimore, play Saturday. That's the schedule this week.
That's a wrap for today then.
Awesome. With that said, guys, we are heading out of here. Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talks. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts. And as always, find all of our work at si.com/NFL. Steelers. We will be back tomorrow. Enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.